In 1980, Cadillac introduced what would become one of the most controversial automobiles in American automotive history. This car, which would be produced from 1980 through 1985, represented a dramatic departure from the highly successful first-generation Seville that had preceded it. And one of the things that fascinates me about this second-generation Seville is how Cadillac took a winning formula and transformed it into something so polarizing that it would take decades for people to appreciate what the designers were attempting to achieve. The first-generation Seville, produced from 1976 through 1979, had been nothing short of a phenomenon for Cadillac. In its debut year of 1975, Cadillac sold 16,355 units in just the first 4 months of availability. By 1976, that number exploded to 43,772 units. 1977 saw sales climb to 45,060 units, and 1978 reached the pinnacle with 56,985 cars sold. Even in 1979, as the model prepared for its replacement, Cadillac still moved 53,487 Sevilles. This was a car that had hit the market at exactly the right time, offering luxury buyers a more compact, European-inspired alternative to the traditional American land yacht. The original Seville rode on what was essentially a stretched Chevrolet Nova platform, though you would never know it from behind the wheel. Cadillac had invested heavily in sound deadening, suspension tuning, and luxury appointments to ensure that this car felt every bit as refined as its larger siblings. The styling was crisp, clean, and remarkably restrained by traditional Cadillac standards. It featured relatively flat body sides without the deep, sculptural elements that had characterized Cadillacs of the 1960s and early 70s. The vertical grille, the sharp creases, the formal roofline, everything about the first-generation Seville spoke of European influence filtered through an American luxury lens. But as the first-generation Seville was preparing to hand over the reins to its successor, something remarkable was happening in Cadillac's design studios. Wayne Kady, who had been Cadillac's chief designer since 1974, had been nursing an idea for a very long time. This wasn't just a styling exercise that had been sketched out a few months before production. No. Wayne had been working on variations of this bustle-back theme all the way back to 1967. Originally, he had conceived it as a two-door design, possibly for use on an Eldorado replacement, but the design had been rejected for that application. The bustle-back concept itself drew inspiration from the golden age of coach building, specifically from luxury automobiles of the 1930s and the custom-bodied British limousines of the 1950s. If you looked at a Hooper-bodied 1954 Rolls-Royce or any number of Daimlers from that era, you would see the same basic proportion: a long hood, a formal passenger compartment, and then a truncated rear deck that dropped away almost vertically. This wasn't just a styling quirk. It was a visual language that once communicated the absolute pinnacle of automotive luxury and custom craftsmanship. In those days, trunks were literally trunks, mounted behind the passenger compartment, before integrated luggage spaces became the norm. Bill Mitchell, General Motors Vice President of Design and one of the industry's most influential stylists, was a major proponent of bringing this bustle-back design to life. When Wayne Kady proposed using the design on the next-generation Seville, Mitchell not only approved, but pushed the design team to make it even more dramatic. Mitchell asked Wayne and his team to tighten up the car overall and give it more pronounced creases and sharper edges than Wayne's original vision, which had featured more rounded surfaces. The result was a car that would either captivate you or repel you, with very little middle ground. When the 1980 Seville was revealed to the public, the automotive press and potential buyers didn't quite know what to make of it. The front end was pure Cadillac. The egg crate grille, the stand-up hood ornament, the way the fenders rose slightly higher than the adjacent hood section. In fact, the hood, windshield, and A-pillars were all shared with the 1979 through 1985 Eldorado, though Cadillac's designers did a masterful job of disguising this part sharing through different grille treatments and front-end styling details. But then your eyes traveled rearward, and suddenly you were looking at something completely unexpected. The roofline was formal and upright, much like the previous Seville. But where the first-generation car had featured a conventional trunk with a gently sloping deck lid, the new Seville's rear end dropped away almost vertically. The trunk lid itself was remarkably short, almost stubby, creating that distinctive bustle-back profile. And despite what you might assume looking at that abbreviated deck lid, Cadillac claimed the car actually had more usable trunk space than its predecessor, with 14.5 cubic feet of capacity. The reaction from Cadillac's traditional customer base was mixed, to put it charitably. Many buyers who had loved the understated elegance of the first-generation Seville found the new design too theatrical, too attention-seeking. The price certainly didn't help matters. The $1,980. Seville came with a price increase of nearly $4,000 over the outgoing model, with several additional increases during the model year. Combined with a recession that was beginning to take hold of the American economy, this created a perfect storm that saw first-year sales plummet to 39,344 units, a decline of more than 25% from 1,979. 1,981 was even worse. Sales fell an additional 27% to just 28,631 units. The bottom truly fell out in 1,982, when only 19,998 Sevilles found homes, making it the worst sales year for the entire second generation. Contemporary reviews from publications like Car and Driver highlighted some of the car's quirks and shortcomings. Testers complained about wind noise around the A-pillars at highway speeds, a tendency for the car to wander if you weren't paying close attention. And most damningly, they noted that the car seemed to appeal more to people in pickup trucks and rusty Oldsmobiles than to the upscale European sedan buyers Cadillac was supposedly targeting. But it wasn't just the controversial styling that handicapped the second-generation Seville. The car was let down significantly by its powertrain options, or rather, the lack of good powertrain options. In 1980, buyers could get either the Cadillac 368 cubic inch V8 or an Oldsmobile 5.7-liter diesel V8. The Oldsmobile diesel, in particular, would go down in history as one of the most unreliable engines ever fitted to an American luxury car, prone to head gasket failures, cracked blocks, and a host of other maladies that left owners stranded and bitter. The gasoline V8 options weren't much better. For 1982 through 1985, the only engine you could get was Cadillac's HT4100, a 4.1-liter V8 that produced just 135 horsepower and roughly 200 pound-feet of torque. This was woefully inadequate for a car that weighed nearly 4,000 pounds. While the HT4100 could deliver surprisingly good fuel economy, 26 to 27 miles per gallon on the highway, which was impressive for a car of this size in the 1980s, it simply didn't have the power or the refinement that luxury car buyers expected. The engine was also prone to reliability issues, particularly with its aluminum block and questionable quality control in its early years. The most desirable second-generation Sevilles, at least from a mechanical standpoint, were actually the 1980 and early 1981 models that could be equipped with the Oldsmobile 350 cubic inch V8 with fuel injection, which produced 170 horsepower. Not a lot by modern standards, but significantly more robust than the HT4100 that would follow. These Oldsmobile-powered cars were smoother, more refined, and considerably more reliable than their HT4100-equipped successors. Despite the controversy and declining sales, Cadillac continued to invest in the Seville throughout its production run. The Elegante trim package, which had been introduced on the first-generation car, carried over to the new model and remained extremely popular among buyers who did choose the Seville. The Elegant featured unique exterior paint schemes, often two-tone combinations that emphasized the car's formal proportions, along with upgraded interior appointments and additional standard equipment. Inside, the Seville continued Cadillac's tradition of leaving virtually no surface unadorned. The dashboard featured what can charitably be described as submarine control panel complexity, with banks of buttons, switches, and warning lights arranged in a vaguely symmetrical pattern. The center stack was dominated by a large panel that in early cars simply said Cadillac at the top, a curious blank space that would later house trip computer displays on better-equipped models. The climate control system initially used rotary dials, though it would eventually be replaced by digital controls in later model years. And speaking of Cadillac emblems, they were everywhere. You would find the wreath and crest emblem on the floor mats, on the steering wheel, embossed into the seat backs, on the reading lights for rear passengers, and even on small plaques mounted to the sides of the seat backs near the shoulder belt anchors. This was peak Cadillac branding. If you were going to spend this much money on a luxury car, Cadillac wanted to make absolutely certain that you and everyone who rode in your car knew exactly what mark you had chosen. The seats themselves featured the button-tufted upholstery that was all but mandatory on American luxury cars of this era. Interestingly, while the Eldorado's top Biarritz trim received button tufting, on the Seville, it was actually the standard model that featured this treatment, while the more expensive Elegante package came with smoother, more contemporary-looking seat surfaces in later years. Sales did eventually recover somewhat. By 1983, with the economy improving, Seville sales climbed back to 30,430 units. 1984 saw a much healthier 39,997 cars sold, and the final year of production, 1985, closed out with 39,755 units. These weren't terrible numbers by any means, but they paled in comparison to the consistently strong sales of the first-generation car. Even at its best, the bustle-back Seville sold fewer units than almost every year of its predecessor. More tellingly, the mechanically identical Eldorado, which shared the Seville's platform, windshield, doors, and many other components but featured conventional styling without the bustle-back treatment, outsold the Seville by more than 2-to-1 throughout this period. This made it abundantly clear that it was the controversial rear-end treatment, not the underlying engineering or the questionable powertrains, that was primarily holding back Seville's sales. When the third-generation Seville arrived for 1986, Cadillac abandoned the bustle-back entirely in favor of a more conventional, though still distinctively Cadillac, three-box sedan design. Initial sales for the new generation were disappointing, with only about 19,000 units sold in 1986 and 1987. It wouldn't be until 1990, with the introduction of the high-performance STS variant and general improvements to the model, that Seville sales would climb back above 30,000 units annually. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. While affluent buyers in the 1980s largely rejected the bustle-back Seville, a completely different audience would eventually embrace these cars with enthusiasm. As the vehicles aged and depreciated, they found new life in urban communities, particularly in the American South, where they became popular platforms for customization. Hip-hop culture, which was maturing throughout the 1980s and exploding into the mainstream during the 1990s, had always had a special relationship with Cadillacs. This connection traced its roots back to the blaxploitation films of the 1970s, where Cadillacs, particularly Eldorados and DeVilles, became symbols of success and style. Curtis Mayfield's Pusherman famously celebrated diamond in the back, sunroof top, diggin' the scene with a gangsta lean, cementing the Cadillac's place in Black American culture. As hip-hop evolved, particularly in the South, Old-school Cadillacs remained aspirational vehicles. Groups like Outcast, UGK, 8-Ball, and MJG, 3-6 Mafia, and the Big Timers all prominently featured Cadillacs in their music and videos. While these artists often showcased 1970s-era models, the bustle-back Sevilles gradually found their way into this automotive ecosystem as well. The cars proved particularly popular in the Donk and slab subcultures that emerged in southern cities. Donk culture, which originated in Miami but spread throughout Florida and the South, involved lifting cars on enormous wheels, often 24 inches or larger, and painting them in eye-catching colors, sometimes with elaborate airbrushed murals. The Seville's distinctive rear-end treatment, which had seemed so out of place in upscale suburban driveways, actually worked perfectly with these extreme modifications. The truncated deck and vertical rear window created a strong visual statement that held its own even when the car was sitting on massive wheels. Similarly, the slab scene in Houston, where slab stood for slow, loud, and bangin', embraced the bustle-back Seville as a legitimate platform for customization. These cars would receive swangas, the distinctive wire wheels that extended far beyond the fenders, extensive sound systems, and custom paint, transforming them into rolling works of art that commanded respect on city streets. Rappers began showcasing these customized Sevilles in music videos and photo shoots, while the Escalade would eventually become the dominant Cadillac in hip-hop culture after its 1999 introduction, with sales increasing by 84% in 2002, largely due to hip-hop's influence. The older models, including the bustle-back Seville, maintained a devoted following among enthusiasts who appreciated their unique styling and customization potential. So what are we to make of the 1980 through 1985 Cadillac Seville? In its own time, it was largely considered a failure, a misguided attempt to recapture the glory of custom coach building in an era when luxury car buyers wanted understated elegance and European sophistication, not theatrical styling statements. The sales numbers tell a clear story. Total production for the 6-year run was approximately 198,155 units, compared to roughly 215,659 units for the 4-year run of the first-generation car. When your successor sells fewer total units despite being on the market 50% longer, that's a pretty clear message from the marketplace. Contemporary buyers often regretted their purchases, frustrated by the attention the cars attracted, not all of it positive, and by the mechanical issues that plagued many examples. The HT4 100 engine's reliability problems and the diesel's outright catastrophic failures left a bitter taste that no amount of luxury appointments could sweeten. Car and drivers testers captured this ambivalence perfectly when they wrote that they liked the front end and they liked the rear end, but they just didn't like them together. Yet time has been kinder to the bustle-back Seville than its original sales figures would suggest. The car has found admirers among automotive historians who appreciate Wayne Kady's commitment to his vision and Bill Mitchell's willingness to push American automotive design in an unexpected direction. The bustle-back Seville was one of the last vehicles designed under Mitchell's leadership before his retirement, making it a swan song of sorts for one of the industry's most influential designers. More importantly, the car found a second life in communities that Cadillac's marketing department probably never considered as potential customers. The same dramatic styling that alienated conservative luxury buyers in suburban country clubs became a strength in urban car cultures that celebrated boldness and individuality. The bustle-back Seville proved that context really is everything. What seems wrong in one setting can be exactly right in another. Today, clean examples of the bustle-back Seville have become collectible, not commanding Mercedes-Benz SL or BMW 6 Series money, but certainly appreciating among enthusiasts who understand their significance. The car represents a road not taken, a glimpse of what American luxury car design might have looked like if designers had been allowed to pursue more theatrical, historical themes rather than chasing European restraint. When we turn to that rear three-quarter view, examining the way that abbreviated deck lid drops away vertically, crowned by those distinctive wraparound taillights that were unmistakably Cadillac, we can see both why the car failed commercially and why it has endured culturally. It was too much car for the 1980s, too bold, too unapologetic about being exactly what it was. But for those willing to embrace its eccentricities, the bustle-back Seville offered something that virtually no other car of its era could match: a genuine sense of occasion, a connection to automotive history, and a design that refused to fade quietly into the background. The 1980 through 1985 Cadillac Seville wasn't the car that Cadillac needed in the 1980s, but it may have been the car that a certain subset of enthusiasts would come to appreciate decades later. And in the end, perhaps that's enough.